Welcome to the complete course on equities, futures, options, and commodities. This is a long, structured master class. We start from the very basics, what these instruments are, and build up, step by step, to the strategies professional investors and traders actually use. We will cover how to pick a sector, how to research a stock, where to find trustworthy research, futures and options explained simply, commodities, and every major strategy for each. One promise up front, this is education, not tips. We will never tell you what to buy. We will teach you how to think so you can decide for yourself. Here is the roadmap. 6 big blocks. First, which sector to select, using a top-down method the professionals use. Second, how to research a stock, both the fundamentals, the business and its numbers, and the technicals, the price chart. Third, where to find genuine research, the trustworthy YouTube channels, data tools, and market voices, and how to tell a real source from a tip seller. Fourth, futures and options, explained from zero, with every major strategy. Fifth, commodities, gold, silver, and crude oil on the MCX. And running through all of it, sixth, risk management, the discipline that decides who survives. Let's begin with the big picture. There are 4 arenas we will master. The first is equities. This is ownership. When you buy a share, you own a small slice of a real business and you grow as it grows. This is where wealth is built. The second is futures. A future is a contract to buy or sell something later at a price fixed today. It is leveraged and it expires. It is a derivative. Its value derives from an underlying asset. The third is options. An option gives you the right, but not the obligation, to buy or sell at a set price for a small fee called a premium. Also a derivative. The fourth is commodities, gold, silver, crude oil, traded on the MCX, mostly through futures. Equities are for investing. Futures and options are powerful but risky tools. Commodities are a world of their own. We will do them all. Before we go deeper, the plumbing, how the Indian market actually works. Buyers and sellers meet on 2 exchanges, the National Stock Exchange, founded 1992, and the Bombay Stock Exchange, Asia's oldest, from 1875. Watching over everyone is the regulator, SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India. Think of it as the umpire whose job is to protect you. Your shares are held digitally in a demat account with one of 2 depositories, NSDL or CDSL. To trade you need a demat plus a trading account. Most brokers open both together. When you buy, the shares reach your account the next working day. That's T+1 settlement. And the market is open from 9:15 in the morning to 3:30 in the afternoon, Monday to Friday. That's the stage. Now the play. Let's lock in Chapter 1. There are 4 arenas: equities, futures, options, and commodities. Equities are ownership, futures and options are derivatives, commodities trade on the MCX. The NSE and BSE are the exchanges, SEBI is the regulator, your shares sit in a demat account, and settlement is T+1. And the spirit of this course, we learn to think for ourselves, we never blindly follow tips. Next, the first real skill, how to choose a sector. Chapter 2, Choosing a Sector. Before you pick a stock, pick the right neighborhood. A great company in a struggling sector is an uphill battle. An average company in a booming sector often gets carried up. Let's learn how the pros choose. Why start with the sector at all? Because of the tide. When a sector is in favor, money flows in and lifts almost every stock in it. When it falls out of favor, even good companies get dragged down. You want the tailwind, not the headwind. This gives us the professional method, top-down. First, read the macro picture: interest rates, crude oil, the rupee, the economy. Then pick the sector that the macro favors. Then, and only then, pick the strongest one or two companies inside that sector. Macro to sector to stock. Narrowing your focus this way means better research and controlled risk. But you also spread across a few sectors that don't move together, so when one zigs, another zags. Let's map the main sectors. Banking and financials are the heaviest weight in the index. When banks move, the market moves. IT services are exporters, they earn in dollars, so a weak rupee helps them. Pharma and consumer staples, the FMCG companies, are defensives. People buy medicine and soap in every kind of economy, so their demand is steady. Auto, metals, and real estate are cyclicals. They boom when the economy expands and suffer when it slows. Energy and the oil marketing companies move with the price of crude. And public sector and defense names live on government spending, budgets, and order books. Notice the deep split there, defensives versus cyclicals. That split is the key to timing sectors. Here is the single most useful table in sector analysis: what drives each one. Some sectors are rate sensitive. Banks, non-bank lenders, real estate, and autos all care deeply about interest rates set by the RBI, about credit growth, and about margins. On RBI policy day, watch these. Others are globally linked. IT services live on the dollar-rupee rate and Western demand. Pharma swings on US FDA approvals and warnings. Metals follow the global commodity cycle and China. For these, watch the dollar, crude, and US data. And some are event-driven. All marketing companies move inversely with crude. Public sector and defense names jump on the budget and on order wins. Consumer and auto names react to GST changes, the monsoon, and rural demand. Learn each sector's one main driver, and the news suddenly tells you a story. Now the timing idea that ties it together: sector rotation. The first myth is that one sector is always the best place to be. It isn't. Leadership rotates. Different sectors lead in different phases of the economic cycle. In a slowdown or a risk-off market, you don't only hide in cash. Defensives, consumer staples, pharma, and often IT tend to hold up better because their demand doesn't vanish. And cyclicals aren't just risky gambles. When the economy is expanding, cyclicals, autos, metals, banks often lead the rally hardest. So the skill is reading which phase we are in and rotating toward the sectors that face favors. That's what the top-down process is really for. Let's turn this into a repeatable 4-step method. Step 1. Read the macro. Where are interest rates heading? What is crude doing? Is the rupee strong or weak? What's the state of the economy? Step 2. Pick the sector that this macro favors. If rates are falling, rate-sensitive banks and realty may benefit. If crude is spiking, oil producers gain and oil consumers hurt. Step 3. Inside that sector, pick the strongest one or two companies. The leaders, with the best balance sheets and the widest moats, not the weakest name hoping to catch up. Step 4. Size your position and spread across a few sectors so no single call can sink you. Macro, sector, leaders, size. Never skip straight from nowhere to a stock tip. That process is what the next chapter, research, makes real. Chapter 2. In one breath. Pick the neighborhood before the house, ride the tailwind, not the headwind. Use the top-down method, macro, to sector, to leaders, to position size. Learn each sector's single main driver, so the news becomes readable. Remember that defensives hold up in slowdowns while cyclicals lead expansions, and leadership rotates through the cycle. Next, we go inside a company, how to actually research a stock. Chapter 3. How to research a stock. This is the heart of investing. A share is not a lottery ticket with a symbol, it is a piece of a living business. Fundamental research is the craft of reading that business, what it earns, what it owns, what it owes, and whether its price is fair. Let's learn it properly. Every listed company publishes 3 statements each year. Let's read them in the language of a simple shopkeeper. The first is the profit and loss statement. It shows sales, costs, and the profit left over for the year. In shop terms, how much I sold and how much I kept. What you watch for is sales and profit rising year over year and healthy margins. The second is the balance sheet. It is a snapshot, on one day, of everything the company owns, its assets, against everything it owes, its debts. In shop terms, what the shop owns and what it owes. Here you watch that debt is under control. The third, and most honest, is the cash flow statement. Profit on paper is an opinion, cash is a fact. This shows the real money that actually came in and went out. In shop terms, the actual money in the till. You want strong, positive cash from operations. A company with rising paper profit but weak cash flow is a shop selling everything on credit. That is a warning sign. Read all 3 together, and the business reveals itself. From those statements come a handful of ratios that reveal quality fast. 4 to know. The first is return on equity, and its cousin return on capital employed. This measures how much profit the company squeezes from the owner's money. Above roughly 15%, held steadily for years, is the mark of a good business. The second is debt to equity, borrowings against the company's own funds. Below 1 is generally safer. A mountain of debt turns a small problem into a crisis. The third is the price-to-earnings ratio, the price you pay for 1 rupee of the company's annual earnings. A high PE means the stock is expensive. But never judge it alone, always compare it to the sector average and to the company's own history. The fourth is promoter holding, how much the founders themselves own. A high stake means their skin is in the game. But if those promoter shares are pledged, borrowed against, treat it as a red flag. These 4, checked in a free screener in minutes, filter out most weak companies. But numbers only tell you the past. Great investing needs the qualitative side, the story behind the numbers. 4 things to judge. The first is the moat. Warren Buffett's word for a durable competitive edge that rivals cannot easily cross, a beloved brand, a powerful network, the lowest cost, or high switching costs that lock customers in. The second follows from it, pricing power. Can the company raise its prices a little without losing customers? If yes, that is a wonderful business, protected from inflation. The third is management. Are the people running it honest, capable, and sensible with the company's money? You judge this by reading the annual report and listening to the quarterly conference calls where management answers analysts. The fourth is runway. Is there a large and growing market ahead of the company? Room to keep compounding for a decade? A wonderful business with a wide moat, run by honest people, in a growing market, that is what you hunt for. Which brings us to the hardest lesson, valuation. The price you pay decides your return. The first myth is that a great company is always a great buy. It is not. Even the finest business in the world becomes a poor investment if you pay too high a price for it. The company can thrive while the stock goes nowhere for years, simply because it started too expensive. The second myth is that a low price-to-earnings ratio always means cheap. Sometimes it is a value trap. The market is pricing in a dying business or a hidden problem you haven't found yet. Cheap can get cheaper. The third myth is that valuation is an exact science. It isn't. It is a reason range. The wise investor estimates a fair value, then insists on buying comfortably below it. That gap is the margin of safety, your protection against being wrong. Great business, fair price, margin of safety. Get those three, and time does the rest. Chapter 3, Distilled. Read all three statements, profit and loss, balance sheet, and cash flow, and remember that cash is a fact while paper profit is only an opinion. Check the four ratios: return on equity above 15, low debt, price to earnings against the sector, and honest promoter holding. Then find the qualitative edge, the moat, pricing power, trustworthy management, and a long runway. And never forget, a great company is not a great stock unless the price is fair, with a margin of safety. Next, the other half of research, the price chart, the tools, and where to find real research. Chapter 4, the price chart, the tools, and where to find genuine research. Fundamentals tell you what to buy. Technicals help with when. And knowing the right sources keeps you learning from teachers, not from tip sellers. Let's cover all three. Technical analysis is the study of the price chart. It doesn't tell you what a company is worth, it tells you what the crowd is doing, which helps with timing. 4 basics. The first is trend, simply the direction. A series of higher highs and higher lows is an uptrend. The trader's first rule is, don't fight the trend. Don't try to catch a falling knife. The second is support and resistance. Support is a price floor where buyers repeatedly step in. Resistance is a ceiling where sellers repeatedly appear. These levels are where the action happens. The third is volume, how many shares changed hands. Volume is the conviction behind a move. A big price move on strong volume is real, a move on thin volume is suspect. The fourth is moving averages, which smooth out the daily noise to reveal the true direction. When the 50-day average crosses above the 200-day, traders call it a golden cross, a classic sign of strength. A final caution, technicals are probabilities, not prophecy. The chart shows the past. Use it humbly. Where do you actually do this research? A toolkit, and the good news is the best tools are free. Start with Screener.in. It gives you a company's financials, its filings, and lets you build custom screens, for example, all companies with return on equity above 15 and debt below 1. It is the beginner's best friend. Next, platforms like Tickertape and Trendline add clean ratios, quality scores, foreign and domestic investor flows, the results calendar, and broker reports in one place. But the single most valuable source is primary, the company's own annual report and its quarterly con call transcript. This is management speaking in their own words. Reading a few of these teaches you more than 100 videos. And for the ground truth, official filings, announcements, order wins, go straight to the NSE, BSE, and SEBI websites. When in doubt, check the source. Now, where should you learn? The popular channels people actually trust. Present all of these as teachers of concepts, not sources of tips. For structured learning from absolute zero, the gold standard is Zerodha Varsity, free, thorough, and it never gives buy or sell calls. On YouTube, the most respected educators include CA Rachna Ranade, a chartered accountant who teaches fundamentals clearly, Pranjal Kamra of Phinology, focused on long-term value investing, and Asset Yogi for financial literacy. They teach concepts, not calls. For deeper, more technical learning, Ilam Markets by StockEdge and Yadnya Investment Academy offer structured courses on technicals and derivatives. And to follow seasoned market voices on X, formerly Twitter, watch fund managers like Sameer Arora of Helios, Saurabh Mukherjee of Marcellus, Nilesh Shah of Kotak, and Deepak Shenoy of CapitalMind for their thinking on the market, not stock tips. Learn from these, verify everything, and remember that the numbers of subscribers matter far less than whether a creator shows their reasoning. This is the most important filter of all: how to tell a real teacher from a tip seller. 3 tests. First, avoid anyone whose main product is specific buy this now calls with price targets. Trust the ones who explain the reasoning behind an idea, so you can judge it yourself. A tip makes you dependent, a method makes you independent. Second, avoid creators who only appear in roaring bull markets and vanish when it turns, or who exist mainly to sell you an expensive course on hype. Trust those who post steadily through bull and bear phases alike. Third, avoid anyone who hides their credentials and sources or promises guaranteed returns. There is no such thing. Trust those who show who they are, cite where their facts come from, and are honest that nothing is guaranteed. Apply these 3 tests, and 90% of the noise falls away. Chapter 4, in brief. Technicals help with when to act, fundamentals decide what to own. Know trend, support and resistance, volume, and moving averages. Do the work in free tools, Screener, Tickertape, Trendline, but treasure the primary sources, the annual reports and con calls. Learn from trustworthy channels like Zerodha Varsity, CA Rachna Ranade, and Pranjal Kamra, and follow seasoned fund managers for their thinking. Above all, trust methods over tips, and verify everything. Now we put research to work, the equity investment strategies. Chapter 5, the equity investment strategies. There is no single best strategy, only the one that fits your temperament, your goals, and your time. Let's walk through every major approach, what it is, its risk, and who it suits. Let's begin with the foundation, the long-term strategies that build most real wealth. The first is buy and hold. Own quality businesses for years, even decades, and let compounding do the heavy lifting. As the saying goes, time in the market beats timing the market. This is the beginner's, and often the master's, strategy. The second is the systematic investment plan, the SIP. Invest a fixed sum every month, automatically. Because you buy more units when prices are low and fewer when high, your average cost stays reasonable, that's rupee cost averaging, and it removes the stress of timing. The third is Core Satellite, a framework. Keep 70 to 80% of your money in a low-cost index core for stability, and use the remaining 20 to 30% for satellite bets, a sector, a factor, a conviction stock. The fourth is pure passive investing, simply owning the whole market cheaply through an index fund. Over the long run, most active funds fail to beat it. Simple and powerful. Now the stock-picking styles, 3 great schools. The first is value investing. The idea, from Benjamin Graham and Warren Buffett, is to buy a rupee of value for 50 paise, to find companies trading below their intrinsic worth. You look for low price to earnings and price to book, and you demand a margin of safety. The risk is the value trap, cheap for a good reason. The second is growth investing. Here you buy companies whose earnings are growing fast, with a long runway ahead, and you accept a higher price to earnings for that growth. The risk is overpaying. If growth slows, the stock can derate sharply. The third blends the two, quality or growth at a reasonable price. Buy a wonderful business, high return on equity, a real moat, but only at a fair price. A useful gauge is the PEG ratio, growth-adjusted PE below 1 is attractive. This is the Marcellus Saurabh Mukherjee school. The risk is that quality gets crowded and expensive. None is right or wrong. They fit different temperaments. Beyond the core styles, 4 more approaches worth knowing. First, momentum or factor investing. Buy what has recently been strong, on the evidence that strength tends to persist a while. You can do this simply through a Nifty 200 Momentum 30 index fund, which rebalances every 6 months. The warning: momentum is aggressive and prone to sudden, sharp reversals called momentum crashes. Keep it as a small satellite. Second, dividend or income investing. Own steady, cash-generating companies for the regular dividends they pay. This suits retirees and anyone wanting income rather than only capital growth. Third, contrarian investing, the boldest. Buy when others are fearful, sell when they are greedy. It means going against the crowd precisely at the extremes, which is psychologically very hard and very rewarding when right. Fourth, sector rotation, the strategy from Chapter 2. Keep rotating your weight toward the sector the macro cycle currently favors. Different tools for different investors and different market weathers. So which strategy is for you? A simple guide. If you are a beginner or simply busy with life, the honest best answer is an index SIP plus buying and holding a few quality companies. It wins more often than clever trading, with far less effort. If you are patient and enjoy hunting for bargains, value investing will suit you. If you can identify and stomach a long growth story, growth or growth at a reasonable price is your path. If you need regular income, tilt toward dividend investors. But whatever you choose, the same discipline applies to all. Size your positions sensibly, diversify across sectors, and stay the course through the ups and downs. The strategy matters less than the discipline to follow it. Now we cross into the world of derivatives, futures. Chapter 5, Gathered Up. The foundation strategies build wealth quietly, buy and hold, the SIP, core satellite, and plain index investing. The picking styles are value, growth, and quality or growth at a reasonable price. And the active approaches, momentum, dividend, contrarian, and sector rotation, each suit a different temperament and market. There is no single best strategy, there is only the one that fits you, executed with discipline. Next, we enter the high-octane world of derivatives, starting with futures. Chapter 6, Futures. We now leave investing and enter trading, the world of derivatives. These are powerful, professional tools. They can protect a portfolio or destroy an account. Let's understand them clearly and respect them. To understand a future, picture a farmer and a flour mill. The farmer's crop is 3 months away. His fear, prices might crash by harvest. The mill owner needs that grain in 3 months. His fear, prices might spike. So today, they agree a deal, a fixed price, for delivery in 3 months. Now both are protected, whichever way prices move. That agreement, to buy or sell something later at a price fixed today, is a futures contract. On the stock market, the underlying is a stock, an index like the Nifty, or a commodity, and the value of the future derives from that underlying. That is why we call it a derivative. The farmer's motive here is protection, hedging. Hold on to that word, it is the honest purpose of all derivatives. 4 features define a stock or index future. First, lot size. You don't trade single shares, you trade fixed bundles called lots. The Nifty futures lot, for example, is 65 units as of January 2026, so one lot is worth several lakh rupees. Second, margin. You don't pay the full contract value. You pay a deposit, roughly 10 to 15%, and control the whole position. That is leverage, and we'll see its danger in a moment. Third, expiry. Unlike a share you can hold forever, every future has a last day. Nifty's weekly contracts expire on Tuesday, the monthly on the last Tuesday. The Sensex expires Thursday. Fourth, and crucial, mark-to-market. Your profit or loss is not settled at the end, it is calculated and settled to your account every single day. If the market moves against you and your margin runs low, the broker issues a margin call, pay up, or your position is closed. That daily settlement means futures give you no room to simply sit and wait out a bad move. Let's see leverage with real numbers, because this is where fortunes are made and lost. Suppose one index futures lot is worth 15 lakh rupees. Your margin to hold it is about 1.5 lakh, so you control 10 times your money. 10x leverage. Now, if the market rises 5%, your position gains 75,000 rupees. On your 1.5 lakh margin, that's a 50% return. Intoxicating. But flip it. If the market falls 5%, you lose 75,000, half your margin, gone, on a mere 5% move. Leverage multiplies your gains and your losses by the very same factor. It does not care which. And because of daily mark-to-market, those losses are very real, very fast. This is why trading futures without a stop loss is like racing without brakes. So how are futures actually used? 4 strategies, from safest to riskiest. The first, and the honest one, is hedging. If you hold a large portfolio and fear a short-term fall, you can short index futures. If the market drops, your futures profit offsets your portfolio loss. It is portfolio insurance, the reason futures exist. The second is directional trading, going long if you're bullish, short if bearish, with leverage. This is the highest risk use, and where most retail traders lose. The third is a calendar spread, buying one expiry and selling another, to trade the price difference between months rather than the market's direction. Lower risk, more advanced. The fourth is cash futures arbitrage, capturing the small gap between a stock's price in the cash market and its futures price. It's low risk but tiny per trade, so it's dominated by institutional algorithms. Remember the 3 players: hedgers reduce risk, speculators take it on, and arbitrageurs exploit gaps. Retail should aspire to hedge, not gamble. Chapter 6: Secured. A future is a contract to buy or sell later at a price fixed today, a derivative of an underlying. You trade it in lots, paying only 10 to 15% margin, which gives you roughly 10 times leverage. Daily mark-to-market and a fixed expiry mean you cannot simply wait out a bad move, and leverage cuts both ways, so a stop loss is non-negotiable. The honest purpose of futures is hedging. Speculation is where most retail traders lose. Next, the most fascinating instrument of all, options. Chapter 7: Options, the basics. Options are the most flexible instrument in all of finance and the most misunderstood. Master the foundation here, and the strategies in the next chapter will click into place. To truly get options, think of your car insurance. You pay a small premium each year. If you have an accident, the insurer pays out a large sum. If nothing happens, your premium is simply gone, and that is your entire loss. Small, known, capped. An option works exactly like this. You pay a small premium to buy a right, the right to buy or sell an asset at a set price. If it works in your favor, you exercise it for a big gain. If not, you let it lapse, losing only the premium. And here is the key symmetry: the person who pays the premium gets the right, the person who receives the premium takes on the obligation, like the insurance company. Buyer has rights, seller has duties. Hold that thought. Everything in options is built from just 2 blocks, the call and the put. A call option is the right to buy at a fixed price. You buy a call when you expect the price to rise. If it soars, you can still buy cheaply at your strike and profit. A put option is the right to sell at a fixed price. You buy a put when you expect the price to fall, or to protect shares you already own, like insurance on your holdings. That fixed price, the price at which you may buy or sell, is called the strike price. And 2 more terms: expiry, the last day the option is valid, and the premium, the price you pay for the right itself. Just remember, call is the right to buy, put is the right to sell. From these 2 atoms, every options strategy is built. Why does a premium cost what it costs? It has 2 parts. The first is intrinsic value, the option's real, exercise it right now worth. For a call, That's the spot price minus the strike, if positive. For a put, the strike minus the spot. If the option isn't yet profitable to exercise, its intrinsic value is 0. The second is time value, the extra you pay for the hope that the option moves your way before it expires. The more time left, and the more the stock swings, the higher this hope premium. This gives us 3 words you'll hear constantly: in the money, at the money, and out of the money, simply whether the strike is favorable, level with, or unfavorable versus the current price. And the crucial fact, time value melts away as expiry approaches, faster and faster in the final days. That melting is the single most important force in options, and it's the subject of the next chapter. Let's make this visual with a payoff diagram, the picture of profit and loss at expiry. Here is a long call. Say the stock is at 100, and you buy the 100 strike call for a premium of 5. Look at the left side. If the stock falls, you simply let the option lapse. Your loss is flat, capped at the 5 you paid, no matter how far it drops. Now the right side. Above 105, your strike plus your premium, the break-even, every further rupee is profit, and there is no ceiling. That is the buyer's dream shape, limited, known loss, large, open-ended gain. It sounds like free money. So why do most option buyers lose? Because of that melting time value. Let's confront it head-on. Chapter 7, in one breath. An option is the right, not the obligation, to act, just like an insurance policy. A call is the right to buy, a put is the right to sell, and strike, expiry, and premium are the core terms. The premium is made of intrinsic value plus time value, and time value melts as expiry nears. For the buyer, the loss is limited to the premium while the upside is large. Now, the deeper mechanics, the Greeks, and the real strategies. Chapter 8, Options Mastery. Now we go professional, the Greeks that measure risk, the real multi-leg strategies, and the hard, honest truth about who actually makes money in options. Stay with me. Professionals don't just guess, they measure their risk with the Greeks, 4 letters, each capturing one force. Delta measures direction, how much the option's price moves for a 1-point move in the stock. A call's delta runs from 0 to 1, a put's from 0 to -1. Gamma measures how fast delta itself changes, the acceleration. High gamma means your risk shifts quickly. Theta measures time decay, how much value the option bleeds every single day just from the clock ticking. For the buyer, theta is negative, it is the enemy. Vega measures sensitivity to volatility, how much the premium changes when the market's expected swings rise or fall by 1%. When fear spikes, Vega pumps premiums up. Delta and gamma track the price, theta and Vega track time and fear. Together, they are the dashboard of every serious options trader. Let's dwell on theta, because it decides who wins. Picture the time value in an option as a block of ice sitting in the sun. Every day, a little melts away, and near expiry, it melts fast. This is why so many option buyers lose even when they guess the direction right. Suppose you buy a call and the stock does rise, but slowly. The time value can melt faster than the stock rises, and you still lose. The buyer must be right on direction and on speed. Now flip the coin. The option seller, who collected that premium, watches the ice melt in their favor. Time is their ally. They just need the passage of days. This is the deep truth of options. Time is on the seller's side. It's why most options expire worthless and why disciplined sellers, with deep pockets and strict risk control, win more often than buyers. But the seller's loss can be huge, so they must manage risk ruthlessly. Now the real strategies, starting with the sensible, income and hedge trio that pairs options with stock you own. The covered call: you own a stock, and you sell a call against it. You pocket the premium as income. The trade-off: if the stock rockets past the strike, your gains are capped. Great in a flat or mildly rising market. The protective put: you own a stock and you buy a put on it. This is pure insurance. If the stock crashes, the put pays off and limits your loss. You pay a premium for peace of mind. The cash-secured put: you sell a put on a stock you'd happily buy anyway, at a lower price. You get paid the premium while you wait. If it falls to your strike, you buy it, effectively at a discount. And a warning: selling options naked, without owning the stock or a hedge, exposes you to large or even unlimited losses. That is strictly for well-capitalized professionals, never a beginner's game. Beyond single legs come the combination strategies, where options truly shine. First, spreads. In a bull call spread, you buy one call and sell a higher one. The sale cuts your cost, in exchange for a cap on your reward. Both your risk and your reward are defined and limited. The bear put spread is its mirror for a fall. These are the disciplined traders' bread and butter. Next, volatility strategies, for when you expect a big move but aren't sure which way. A long straddle buys both a call and a put at the same strike. You profit if the stock moves sharply in either direction, say around a big result. A strangle is the cheaper version, using wider strikes, but it needs an even bigger move to pay off. And for the opposite view, that the market will stay calm and range-bound, the iron condor sells an out-of-the-money call spread and put spread, collecting premium that you keep if the market goes nowhere. Each has a precise payoff shape and a precise use. This is the craft of options. Before you touch any of this, the hard truth, the number every options course should be forced to show. SEBI, the regulator, studied real trading accounts. In the financial year 2025, 91% of individual futures and options traders lost money. 91 out of every 100. Their combined net loss in a single year was over 1 lakh crore rupees, around 1,10,000 rupees each, on average. And an earlier study found 71% of intraday equity traders also lost. This is not to scare you, it is to arm you with reality before the excitement does. Options are a professional instrument for the educated, the well-capitalized, and the ruthlessly disciplined. My honest guidance: master investing first. Come to options later, in tiny size, only after real study, and never with money you cannot afford to lose. Chapter 8, the big one, gathered up. The Greeks measure your risk: delta for direction, gamma for speed, theta for time decay, vega for volatility. Time decay favors the seller. The buyer must be right on both direction and speed. The sensible strategies pair options with stock, covered calls, protective puts, cash-secured puts, and the combinations, spreads, straddles, strangles, and iron condors, each fit a precise view. But never forget the 91%. Options reward the disciplined and punish the reckless. Next, a different market entirely, commodities. Chapter 9, Commodities. Beyond stocks lies a parallel market, real, physical things, gold, silver, crude oil, metals. In India, these trade on the MCX. Let's learn how and why gold in particular belongs in a portfolio. So, what are commodities? Raw, physical goods grouped into families. First, bullion, gold and silver. These are safe haven assets, stores of wealth that people flee to in uncertain times. Second, energy, crude oil and natural gas, driven by OPEC decisions, demand, and geopolitics. Third, base metals, copper, zinc, aluminium, the industrial metals that rise and fall with global growth and, especially, China. In India, these trade on the MCX, the multi-commodity exchange, the largest and, like the stock market, regulated by SEBI. One big difference, because commodities track global markets, the MCX stays open far longer, from about 9 in the morning until nearly midnight, around 11:55 p.m., so it can react to overnight news from around the world. That long window, plus leverage, makes commodities a fast, demanding market. How do you actually trade a commodity? Almost always through futures, you trade a contract, not a vault of gold. The contracts come in standardized lot sizes. Gold, for instance, has a main 1 kilogram contract and a smaller gold mini of 100 grams so ordinary traders can take part. As with stock futures, you pay only a small margin, a fraction of the contract's value, which means the same double-edged leverage. A small favorable move is magnified, so is an unfavorable one. And what moves commodity prices? Global forces. Gold and silver respond to the US dollar, to real interest rates, and to geopolitical fear, plus, in India, the huge festival and wedding demand. Crude follows OPEC and the world economy. Base metals follow global growth. This is a macro trader's arena. You're really trading world events. Here is the most useful commodity idea for a normal investor. You do not have to touch the leverage at all. You can own gold simply, without a futures contract. A gold ETF holds gold in your demat account, no storage, no leverage, sell it in one click. A sovereign gold bond is government-issued gold that even pays you a small interest on top. Both are calm, non-leveraged ways to own gold. Why own gold at all? Because of its role as a hedge. Gold often rises exactly when equities fall. They have low correlation. So a slice of gold cushions your portfolio in a crash. How much? Around 5 to 10% of your portfolio as ballast, a stabilizer, not the main engine of growth. For traders, commodities offer trend following, hedging, and spread strategies like the gold-silver ratio. But for the everyday investor, gold's real job is quite insurance. Chapter 9, in brief. Commodities, bullion, energy, and base metals trade on the MCX, mostly through leveraged futures. Their prices are driven by global macro forces, the dollar, interest rates, OPEC, and geopolitics. But you don't need the leverage. A gold ETF or a sovereign gold bond lets you own gold calmly. And gold's real value to a portfolio is as a hedge. Keep around 5 to 10% as insurance, not as a bet. Finally, the thread that ties everything together, risk management. Chapter 10, the final chapter, risk management, and putting the whole course together. Everything we've learned means nothing without this. The first job of an investor is not to make money, it is to not go broke. Survival first. Here are the survival rules that discipline the 91% ignored. 1. Risk only 1 to 2% of your total capital on any single trade. Then even 10 losses in a row cannot ruin you. This one rule separates survivors from casualties. 2. Always use a stop loss on any leveraged or active position. Decide, before you enter, where you are wrong and will exit. No exceptions, especially in futures and options. 3. Diversify across sectors and across asset classes. Equities, some debt, a little gold. When one zigs, another zags. 4. Never mix your investing capital with your trading capital. Keep the long-term wealth pot completely separate from the money you actively trade. 5. Never borrow money or use margin trading leverage to chase returns. Remember, the 91%, leverage is what turned their losses catastrophic. Follow these 5, and you will still be standing when opportunity comes. So which of all these tools is for you? Match the instrument to yourself, honestly. If you are a beginner or a long-term investor, your toolkit is simple and powerful: an index SIP plus a few quality stocks aimed at long-term wealth, needing just a few hours a month. Futures and options? Not yet, you don't need them. If you are experienced, you can add hedging, using futures to protect your portfolio while your core stays invested for growth with weekly research. Here, F&O earns its place in small size, mainly for protection. Only the dedicated, near full-time trader with a tested method and iron discipline should run active options strategies and trade commodities. And even then, only with strict risk rules. There is no shame in the first column. It quietly builds more wealth for more people than the third ever will. Let's bring the entire course together in one breath. Start with the sector, top down, from macro to sector to the leaders within it. Research properly, the 3 statements, the key ratios, the moat, and always a fair price with a margin of safety. Learn from methods and trustworthy channels, varsity, honest educators, seasoned fund managers, and never from tips. For equity strategy, an index SIP and a few quality names serve most people beautifully, even though you now know them all. Futures and options are powerful tools, use them to hedge first, and never forget that 91% of speculators lose. In commodities, let gold be a 5 to 10% hedge, and always respect the leverage. And binding it all, the risk rules that keep you in the game. Survival first, returns second. You now have the complete map. Learn deeply, risk little, and compound patiently. That is how wealth is truly built. This is educational content, not investment advice. Do your own research and consult a SCBI registered advisor. Thank you for watching.